today we're going to talk about the sign of Gemini, the constellation of Gemini. What does Gemini represent in one's life and how to utilize Gemini? Previously I spoke about Aries. I spoke about the sign of Taurus and how the sign of Taurus and the sign of Aries relate in one's life. Now when we get into the sign of Gemini, we deal more with the first act of thinking, okay? And obviously the first act of thinking is actually to connect with the positive and the negative aspect of the mind. So, previously in my previous video in the age of Taurus, I described how Taurus represents the actual voice in astrology, and Gemini creates the air passage between the voice. So in essence, the first actual vocal tone is actually uttered in the age of Taurus, or in the sign of Taurus. But Gemini within itself holds the fluid or the synthesizing of how the vocal cord will express itself smoothly based upon how the air is transmutated. And so the voice begins with, in the beginning was the word in the age of Taurus, but in essence Gemini is the communicative aspect of the word within itself, so it allows word to become uttered. So therefore means Gemini governs the lungs. It also governs the hands, because the hands also represents a form of communication. The shoulders represents the whole body is an actual communication tool. So the maneuvering or moving through the earth, or moving through the specific nature of earth, is actually Gemini. Actually, we are in a Mercury retrograde, and the Mercury retrograde also, what it does, it confuses things. So what just happened just now, I've just made a video, and the video was maybe about 30 minutes long, and I actually described everything to do with Gemini, and somehow the wind managed to push over my camera and everything got swiped out. So basically what you're getting is me just repeating myself from the beginning, and some things were quite intuition, but maybe they weren't supposed to be said. But however it's going to be layered in this video, it's how it's meant to be layered. So basically it is what it is, and it is what it is. So let us continue. So basically Gemini governs, or the planet Gemini is governed by Mercury. Mercury governs communication, and obviously communication is in any form. So communication through the air, communication through airplane, communication through internet, it is a form of communication. So that's the sign of Mercury in itself when it moves throughout the sky. So it appears to be retrograde in its astronomical term, it is, but on a psychological term and how we relate collectively, it's not. So therefore means it's interconnected in the sense where it merges everything together. So when we look at Gemini, the higher nature of Gemini is actually linked to Taurus, and not Taurus, sorry, it's actually linked to Libra. But Libra from a scale from Venus, connecting it from a mental point of view. From its highest point of view, it is Taurus, but from its mental point of view, it's Libra, because the planet that governs Gemini on an esoteric level is Venus, and that is when the air sign is synthesized through Venus within itself, as opposed to Mercury, because Mercury governs the mental aspect of thinking. However, Libra governs the synthesizing of relating in polarity, because each sign governs a polarity, and that's how you merge within polarity. So Taurus within itself, from its highest nature, needs the water to manifest into the earth, and so therefore means, it needs Taurus represents the aspect of physical earth, physical manifestation, as opposed to Scorpio is water, and the water has to first become solid. It has to solidify in itself into the water. So every sign in itself solidifies itself into water. All right. Into Earth. So this retrograde is killing me. And so basically, this is where you get the combination of why Taurus represents the voice, and as opposed to Gemini governs the air faculty of the mind. And so the air faculty of the mind is more synthesizing every element together, and then when you link it up with Libra, Libra harmonizes the frequency. You will understand where I'm going with this as we go further along the video. So now, okay, so Gemini governs we spoke about Gemini and Libra. Gemini governs initiation. It's the first initiation of thinking, because it also governs the Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet, which you get, is actually the tablet which governs thinking. It's called the Kabbalion. I've spoken about this in many of my videos, and it governs the 7 principles of thinking. Now, people speak about The Secret, the DVD, and which actually talks about how you think. What you would like attract like, but opposite don't attract. And that is just the first steps of thinking. But there's a book called The Secret Source, which deals with the 6 missing laws of thinking. You only know one from The Secret, but there is 6 other laws which governs the state of thinking. And so those 6 layers of thinking ties into polarity, which is actually the sign of Libra. And the sign of Libra governs obviously synthesizing. So the Emerald Tablet comes from the emerald. The actual emerald in itself is a crystal, a gemstone, a precious stone. And that precious stone basically connects with the friendship connection between you and other people. So, you know, Geminis in general make good friends. They have a lot of friends, and they know a bit of everything at the same time. They represent communication, so this is the reason why they know a bit of everything about anything, and they don't know all of everything. As opposed to the connection of Aquarius. Aquarius deals with knowing, all knowing, as opposed to Gemini is the first synthesizing of knowing. So this is why one has to first think in order for one to know. So knowing comes in the end from experience, which is the 9th house of, or you could say that the sign of Sagittarius. And then from the sign of Sagittarius, then one becomes the teacher. Once one becomes the teacher, then one becomes the knower. How the student and the knower, or the student and the teacher, knows itself is that the teacher first has to learn from the student, and then the student in itself teaches the teacher. This is why they say that the student has to be quicker than the teacher in his teaching. So therefore means it has to know in itself. He has to oppose the teacher within question before the question is asked, for then the teacher to learn from the student. And this is how the one and the teacher become student and teacher. So in essence, when we look at the sign of Gemini, they are one and the same in the sense that the sun represents light, which will be Horus. That would be the one side of Gemini, and Set would represent the night. And so they are constantly battling with each other. So the sun and the night, or the moon and the sun, are constantly battling with one another to become one with each other. This is why, again, we link it up to why Taurus is the sign of Hathor, which is the sun and the moon crescent at the top. That is the symbol of Taurus. And so the symbol of Taurus is actually letting you know where the direction of Gemini is coming through. So the next sign, which is Gemini, allows you to understand the polarity. So that's when you go through the forward part of the wheel. And when you go anti-clockwise, this is where you manifest the air into the voice. So the voice is the manifestation when it becomes one within itself. And so the air represents when it's fluid within itself. The air gives birth to the voice. So this is why Gemini represents the air passage of the voice as opposed to the voice. So the Towers of Babel represents confusion in communication. And confusion in communication is actually related to the time, 6,000 years. So 6,000 years ago, we could say there was the new man that came into earth, the Adam. And so that new man was basically came across 6,000 years ago. This is when we look at the astrological times and the ages. So each year governs, each sign of years governs 2,106,000 years. So basically, these amount of years is what takes off between each sign. So when we go 3 times that, which obviously we're in the age of Pisces, so if we go 3 times that, we actually reach approximately 6,000 years, which actually governs the age of Gemini. And obviously at that time, there was a new form of creation. And so that also obviously links to the Towers of Babel, but in essence it's actually to do with the new kind of mind, or the new kind of man, or a new kind of mankind. So basically now what we have is a new polarity. So this is why Castor and Pollux represent brothers, and obviously the same thing with Ganesh and his brother, I can't remember his name. Then you have also Horus and Set. It's the same kind of communication which goes on. There is a misconversation, but in essence it's a merging between one. What happens is the Gemini sign tries to find itself, so therefore it has to oppose itself from itself to know itself. So therefore means this is like the female and the masculine energy. In a tarot card you find that the Lovers card is actually the woman and the man, and the initiator is God. But in essence the woman has to fall in love with the man, and the man has to fall in love with the woman. So in essence all it is trying to merge within itself, but it's losing itself through the thoughts of itself as itself, and think that the thoughts in itself is itself, but it's not. So the thoughts are actually the layers of Gemini. Gemini is constantly caught up in thinking, and the process of thinking is actually the process of knowing oneself. And this is why Aquarius represents the knower, and Gemini represents the first actual perception of thinking. And so it has to balance itself in the polarity of Libra. So therefore means this is when you play chess. When you get into Libra, you then create polarity. You understand, you synthesize, should we say the chess game begins in Gemini, and then it solidifies itself in Libra. And in Libra, okay, the wind is blowing again, I just don't want it to blow out my camera. So in Libra, it then harmonizes and basically finalizes itself and understands itself, and then becomes creative. So the first thinking mind is uncreative, because the first thinking mind has to first put things together. And so when it reaches the second side of thinking, it becomes creative. And obviously that's in the sign of Libra. So Gemini become creative once they connect with Libra. Libra is their synchronization of creativity. And once that creativity is realized, it then becomes. This is why Taurus again represents a physical manifestation, and Libra represents manifestation of the mind creatively. And talking about that, actually, Venus represents the highest faculty of creativity on earth. This is why the Ankh is actually the symbol of life. And the reason why for that is because it represents feminine and masculine manifestation. So obviously the third would be the child. And as I was talking about previously earlier, was that what Gemini has to do is synthesize between the feminine aspect and the masculine aspect. So therefore means when it's synchronized, it creates the third. And when it creates the third, it then basically becomes harmonized. And so this is where you get Masonry. This is where Masonry comes from. The Towers of Babel is nothing more than Masonry, because the 33 degrees is actually when you reach initiation, and initiation is to do third degree stuff. It's the 6,000 year stuff that I was talking about again. The knowledge that you get is profound, so then it manifests itself as the hypnagogic state, and all it is nothing more than you tapping into Isis, and Isis is a set, and obviously Isis is the Great Mother, and the Great Mother is nothing more than the vision. And why do I say that? Because the Great Mother represents Pisces. Pisces is the Alpha in Omega, and Gemini is the beginning of confusion. Well, look, the first sign of thinking is in Gemini, and the synthesizing and letting go of thinking is in Pisces, because Pisces represents the Alpha Omega, right? It's the two fishes. It represents eyes, and it represents impressions, and impressions are actually given through dreams. So you get impressions in dreams. You're not thinking, you're actually getting impressions, and you only think when you're on your day-to-day motion of life. So this is why thinking governs it's not your true self, but it's to know yourself. You have to first think. For then, this is why it represents the separation between the knower and the not knower, or the thinker trying to know itself. This is what Gemini is trying to do. It's trying to know itself into the vision impression. Remember, Horus represents the active mind, Set represents the unconscious mind. So in essence, when you sleep, you connect with Set, or you connect with the moon. And when you wake up, you connect with the sun. You connect with the day. So now I'm talking to you through the day. And then the nighttime will kind of merge you into the nighttime and the sleep state. So the key to Gemini is to harmonize itself. And through that, Gemini has to learn through meditation. This is why the emerald is a good crystal for Gemini. And Gemini's, the emerald, what it does, what they said the emerald was to do, was to connect you to people and to give you that connection with them, so you can have many friends. And so this is why Gemini has many friends. And in relations to that, obviously the emerald is that stone that does that. So emerald is about connecting with the mind in that level. So I'm tongue-tied in myself because my mind is thinking other things at the same time. So this is why Gemini have many friends, and many friends represents many things, many information. But Gemini also represents the trickster, because Ganesha was the trickster. Okay, I don't want my camera to drop. Okay, so it might drop, but here we go. So Gemini becomes the trickster, because Gemini went across the world in 5 seconds by just skipping forward from the line and then skipping backwards from the line, as opposed to his brother. His brother was really fast, and Ganesha was really massive, and obviously he couldn't run. So he had to use his mind, and that represents the faculty of Gemini, to run across the whole globe. And so he skipped from the beginning line back into the finishing line. So he stepped forward and backwards. And his brother went all across the world. And obviously, because his brother was fast, like Ganesha had to think of a creative way to kind of overtake him. And this is why Ganesha is governed by the mind. Okay, so basically we know now what Gemini does. Gemini thinks with its highest nature of the mind. Well, it thinks with its lowest nature to create the highest perception of the mind. And so Gemini is the faculty of thinking, and it needs to think in order to it to know. And then when you get into, obviously, remember when I spoke about the 6,000 years, is where the first man began. So basically, when it gets into the age of Cancer, which I will be talking about in my next astrological sign when I have the time, is that in the age of Cancer, you find that the people of Cancer were linked to Sirius. Now, we will get into that. They're linked to Sirius, and obviously Sirius is actually one of the first people on Earth. You know, the Lemurians came during the age of Sirius. And there's a connection between Sirius and the age of Taurus. They have a connection to one another, and because there's a strong connection to. Well, all right, let's put it this way: the Egyptians left Egypt in the age of Taurus, because in the age of Taurus they knew that there was a time where they were going to lose their power. This is why the Aryans came in. And then you had the obviously the first Adamites, which the second Adamites, or the layers of Adamites. I don't know how many Adamites there were that were created in the age of Gemini. Okay, that's where you get 6,000 years. So during the age of Taurus, the Egyptians left. This is why they left a lot of hieroglyphics on the wall and all of that stuff to basically, just give information to what was about to happen. And this is why the confusion of languages came through in the age of Gemini, because once the information was on the wall, then it had to be confused. So the confusion of languages was actually in Gemini, because Gemini represents air. You can confuse, you can trick. This is why I spoke about Ganesh as a trickster. You hear me? So the trickster, Gemini is actually the trickster. So it can confuse information and put information in different ways. And obviously, now when we talk about race, different race governs different signs. But in the age of Pisces, you get a connection of all the races, because Pisces represents the last final zodiac sign in astrology, and so therefore means it has all of them in one, and so therefore means this is why there's a lot of mixes. So this is the power connection between what do you call it, Pisces. Pisces is a powerful sign because Pisces now dissolves confusion, as opposed to Gemini brings confusion to know itself. So Gemini would do very well with meditation. Meditation is an asset to Gemini. Remember, if I'm repeating myself, it's because I can't fully remember what was said in the previous video and what was said in this video. So I'm making sure that I'm synthesizing everything that the Mercury retrograde is doing to me. Yeah, because obviously I can't remember what I said, but I'm gonna keep talking anyway. So basically, yeah, I have lost a few things during this Gemini. I've lost 200 pounds and a bit, which I got robbed from a family member, I think. Who knows? But anyways, to carry on about this, Gemini is a trickster, so it's about confusing things, bringing things into confusion. So it kind of makes sense when you look at the connection between that and many other things with Mercury and Gemini together. Remember, Mercury is the trickster, and Gemini is the sign of the trickster. And so Gemini embeds and fills the trickster. You know, when we get into astrology, you also have to look at, obviously, the planets are the thought forms. The signs are the initiators of the planets. And this is why, you know, the thought forms are always active. The signs not really, because the signs create the thought forms. What is a thought form? The thought form is something that is active. It's always active. It's activity. So the planets are players. They are constantly active. And the signs are more observers. The signs are observers of activity, but the signs within themselves still have an observation point of activity. So therefore means they are as active as the players, but their activity is more subtle in essence. So this is how you can look at it from a deeper layer. So now let's talk about, I'm not sure if I spoke about this, but generally when you have Gemini in the first house, the third house, or the 10th house are good position for teachers, and also good position for artists, because the first house represents the light, the rising. The third house represents speech. The fourth house represents, the 10th house represents teachers. And so it also depends on which is more beneficial to have, you know, what planet is governing what planet is dominating which sign or which house. It's always the first, the third, and the 10th house which governs and describes the teacher, the student, and the knower. So the knower is in the 11th house, but is in between the 10th and the 11th house. The student is in the third, and the first is also the teacher, because the teacher is the light. The light can also be the teacher and the student, because the light is coming from the east and is actually showing itself from the east and knowing itself from the east, and everything becomes known when it's in the first house. Nothing is ever hidden all the time. The 8th house only hides something for a short period of time. The 9th house makes one know about the hidden secrets. The 10th house makes one a teacher of the secrets. The 11th house completely knows. The 12th house merges everything, and the first house allows you to connect with everything again, once again. This is why the first house always goes to war, or this is why Aries always goes to war, and Aries is always the activity, or Mars is always the first action of war. So basically from the war, it's from knowing the whole will from zero, once again, and becoming and starting a new league or a new game again. So all it is, when you look at astrology, there's two ways. You could either go through the first wheel, which is the clockwise wheel, or you can go through the anti-clockwise wheel. The ages obviously governs the anti-clockwise wheel, and the signs within itself moving through seasons govern the clockwise wheel. This is why the sun moves the day moves in a clockwise motion, but the dream is like an anti-clockwise, because it gets confusing, because you get an impression of the future sometime, or you get an impression of the past, or you get an image of something, but really everything is happening in the present moment. This is why Gemini has to look at the present state of thinking in order for it to know itself in its thoughts. So the present moment is actually where you know. The present moment is the knower of the past and the future. The past and the future, as we know, is only the thought that was thought in the past, which creates the future. But once you dissolve the past, you then get off future and you live in the present. If you can remain in the present or in a state of presence, you will notice that there is no such thing as the past. The past is only an image or the impressions from a dream state. The impressions of a dream state is obviously Pisces, and the impressions of a dream state is actually confused because it doesn't give you the full spectrum. It only gives you an impression. A thought form, an entity, a larvae, a spirit can give you an impression, and therefore means the impression is not always the truth. The impression is only giving you a truth that could be based upon your thought process of the past, and the thought process of the past connects to the moon. Again, the moon represents the mind, but the mind is still governed by Mercury. The Mercury and the moon have a connection. Mercury represents the mind in its thought process to the moon. The moon represents the past aspect of the mind. You see, when we look at astrology, there's a whole wheel going on. So to know yourself, you must know your moon sign. To be yourself, you must be your sun sign. To know yourself fully as a soul consciousness, you must know your actual zodiac sign as your ascendant, because your ascendant is your soul. So this is why Gemini, Mercury, as well as the moon, actually gives you the aspect of the truth. Because Cancer, the zodiac Cancer governs the moon. Basically, the moon represents a time when the earth was in, well, when the earth came, the first people on earth were obviously the Syrians. So the moon gives you that aspect. So this is why it represents the past. But obviously, when we look into the deeper layers of the stars, we figure out that Gemini also gives you the faculty of thinking, because thinking is actually letting you know what happened in each time, each zodiac signs. And so this is how you can kind of correlate all of the signs together, or the present, the future, and the moment within itself, because it's all one and the same. This is why, again, Gemini governs the age of languages, the age of information coming from one space to another space. And so Gemini governs that. And so this is why, again, Gemini represents initiation. Once it reaches towards Isis or Venus, it then reaches the next layer of thinking and the next creation of manifestation. And again, that's again linked through Gemini. So Gemini has to synthesize the sign of Mercury to become one into Venus. Remember, Gemini is governed by Mercury, which Mercury governs the two antennas as the symbol. And taking off the two antennas above, you get the sign Venus, and Venus merges everything into one. So this was my video on Gemini, and I hope you had a understanding of how the actual energy merges itself and how to utilize Gemini. And remember, everything is to do with slowing down those thoughts. And once you slow down those thoughts, you're able to see what Gemini is doing, and then you're able to be creative with those thoughts. This is where you take Libra into action, and Libra creates the possibility for you to be creative with those thoughts and to be separate from the thoughts. And this is why Libra represents polarity in astrology. Thank you so much for watching this great video, and enjoy the sun, because you know it's amazing and you only get it, well, we're going to get it for a very long time, to be honest with you. I will not get into this in this video, but I do know that we will be getting it for a very long time. And throughout the years, as the years go, we're going to see more light and more sun. Thank you so much. And hopefully this Mercury retrograde won't make me lose this video.